have a great panel, and the topic, as you know, is the changing role of American farmers. Specifically, this need before us to sort of revisit what role American farmers play in society, bringing back a sort of agriculture where humans actually matter. So that's what this panel is about.
As you all know, there's been a lot of changes taking place in the food system. More recently, it's been local. That's been, one of the driving forces. People want to know that the food comes from a certain distance from where they live. And that has a lot of things to commend it, because it connects people to their food, it connects people to the farmers that are raising the food. There are a whole lot of things from that are very, very beneficial. And then I think about that in terms of the state where I grew up in North Dakota, where we only 620,000 people in the whole state. If we all ate within 150 miles, we'd only use 10% of the farmland. What would we do with the other 90%? We need to preserve the notion of local and all of the values that it has, but frame it in a slightly different way.
I wonder, Fred, if you might talk about this concept of a food shed and how that ties into this and actually makes these conversations relevant to people here, or could.
A food shed is sort of a metaphor borrowed from watershed. So, watersheds, as we know, are not all the same size. They're adapted to their place. They're whatever size that fits the place where they are. A community of people decide that they're going to take charge of their food, and they will decide how the food will be produced, how it will be processed, what the health consequences are going to be, and all of that.
Well, one of the parts of the food shed concept that's exciting for me is the opportunity to expand our sense of what a relationship with a farmer can be. Right now, and it's very exciting that we have as many farmers markets as we do right now, and that direct conversation is happening between people who are buying food and people who are growing it. But I think the food shed concept allows for an expansion of that relationship, that you could actually care about someone who you might never meet.
Go into the store and buy Organic Valley milk. You may not know where the farm that came from, but if you look on the date code at the top and it says 36 at the top, that means it was processed in New York, which means almost certainly it came from a small New York farm. If you go and specifically try to buy that, you're expanding the idea of a food shed, because now you're buying that milk from Maureen Knapp, you're buying it from David Detweiler, you're buying it from Abram Miller, you're buying it from Chuck Dykman. These are real people with real families, and they're New York farmers. You may not have to see them face to face, but you're making that choice.
There was an infrastructure that knitted farmers together in communities all throughout the first half of the 20th century. The rail connections, the feed mills, the creameries, the independent slaughterhouses, the independent banks, the independent businesses, all of that stuff went down. And what farmers are now doing, what I see them doing everywhere, especially in places like the Hudson Valley, where they begin to reintegrate in a different kind of way, they're having to rebuild these communities, and they're having to rebuild this infrastructure. They're having to reconnect all these points of connection that were intentionally demolished. They didn't just accidentally vanish. We like to pretend that it was kind of a natural result of free markets operating as they're supposed to, which is nonsense. It was intended, it had a purpose, its function was fulfilled, and we're looking at it all around us right now.
In a traditional supply chain, everybody competes with everybody else, right? So the farmer or the processor competes with the farmer to get the product as cheaply as possible. The distributor, competes with the processor, and the retailer competes. So everybody competes with everybody else. And we're saying, look, in this new food world that we're in, people ought to cooperate together to bring that product into the marketplace as efficiently and with the kind of quality and value that the customer wants. And Shepherd's Grain is one of the groups. They're a group of wheat growers out the farmers are in 3 different states. The farmers who grow the wheat, the millers who mill the wheat into flour, and the bakers who use the flour to bake their bread. They all sit down at the beginning of the year before the farmers plant their crop, and they first of all calculate what the farmer's cost of production is, so that they're sure that the farmers have their cost of production. And then they add to that a reasonable return, so that the farmers have a reasonable return so that they can stay in business, because it's in everybody's interest for them to stay in business for them, right? And I've talked to the farmers, I've talked to the millers, I've talked to the bakers, and they all say the same thing. When they get together now at the beginning of the year, they all say, we can't believe everybody doesn't do business like this. It just makes sense.
Those kinds of projects, supported by you folks, supported by our government, by Ag and Markets, and really feeling that this is a new way to market, I think really could take off.
And the reason that I am hopeful about the changes that are going to come, and it's still a tiny, tiny part of the total food culture, but there is now this new movement, which really is about relationships and about people being connected.
I think these systems will converge. The conventional farmers are already under unbelievable pressure to find an alternative. I mean, they are literally, their backs are against the wall in every sense. The alternatives are right here. The alternatives are right, they're staring them right in the face. It's just a matter of how that final transition takes place.
Well, I think that's a good place to stop. I mean, we could go on for hours, clearly, here, but I want to thank everyone for coming. I think it is not insignificant that about, I don't know, 60, 80 of us have just spent more than an hour and a half one night in Manhattan talking about farming. This is fantastic. Thank you all for coming.